Tadelman, who is Sheriff of McHenry County, here to discuss the effect the Safety Act has on the Sheriff's Office. He will also speak on the gun registration requirements for 2024. In addition, the migrant crisis within our communities, what we as citizens can do. So please join me in welcoming Robb Tadelman to discuss all of these issues, and then after he's finished, like I mentioned, we will have questions. So
I'm going to start tonight with a couple different stories here. One of them starts with a young boy who grew up with a two-parent household. That's not awkward. Two-parent household. Both parents are very successful, high school sweethearts, college sweethearts, get married, buy a house, raise some kids. One of those kids happens to be a baseball player, able to do travel baseball, able to get into college. Parents pay for college, paved the way for that individual's success, who then turns out to be very successful in his career, as a CEO of an organization. Another individual grew up in a household, parents were business owners, owned a store, pretty successful store, but fell to the big box store, who also opened up a store that did the same type of product, and were forced to scrape and every penny underneath the couch and make ends meet. Parents who knew that they were there to make their children's lives better, so they went out and found work that they could successfully do. That young child who grew up into his adolescence got a job at 14 because he understood what it meant to go into the workforce, was also part of athletics, but was not part of the politics in athletics because his parents were part of the upper echelon, the upper class. So that individual had to scrape his way into not making travel teams, but playing in-house baseball, making his way to high school baseball, and not being on the elite teams because he was not known. Parents weren't donors to the organization, and had to just muddle his way along. Also went to college, but gained in-state tuition by living in the state where he went to school, so he could alleviate the cost of college. Graduated, and also became successful in his career as a CEO of his respective organization. My name is Robb Tadelman, and I am both of those stories. So when we think about it, storytelling is very important on how we try to get our message across. My parents, you said this is going to be seamless too. He comes in, he's like, hey, I'm your audio guy. I got you taken care of. Just wink at me if you have a problem. You picking up on that? I'll tell you what, I don't like standing anyway. So my parents grew up in Morton Grove, where I was born, and my parents had a swimwear lingerie shop, actually one in Skokie, one in Glenview, and then they opened one in a mall out this way, Stratford Square. Very successful, open doors. I remember seeing, as a little kid, I was there when they were opening up, and for a couple of years, really, really successful, and then Victoria's Secrets moves in next door and completely knocked them out, right? So my parents, high school sweethearts. My dad actually went to Iowa State University to play baseball because he couldn't afford college, got a scholarship to Iowa State, ended up being at that time Iowa State was Big 8. He was the batting champ his sophomore year of Big 8. My mom followed him over there because she was going to go to Western Illinois, and but she followed him. She was a cheerleader at Iowa State, and all the good heartwarming stories. They both were. My mom was an English major. My dad was an education major because that's what athletes do. They find the easiest. No, I'm just kidding. My mom ended up getting a resident assistant and an English aide job at Western Illinois. My dad got a coaching job over there. They lived in a trailer, and then ended up coming back home, and then got hooked up with this idea of a business and kind of started this business on their own through, a bunch of other jobs. And then we moved to Hoffman Estates because they wanted to be a little closer to work, but also provide a space that myself and my sister, who's younger, could go to Friend High School, privileged school, get their children a good education. Store closed, and both my parents were like, well, now what? We have this mortgage that we were, barely able to meet when we had our business, and now we have to make ends meet. So my mom goes into real estate, becomes one of the top realtors in the area. My dad adapts and overcomes, becomes a salesman for a bunch of different organizations, but ultimately landed on his feet at Brinks Home Security, was like salesman of the year for many years, became the branch manager and a general manager, and the rest is history. As for me, I was trying to live in my dad's shoes as a good athlete. That's hard. That's a hard chapter to follow when your dad is legit athlete, tries out for the Chicago Cubs and all that stuff. So I found myself in a position of a nobody, pretty quiet kid, kept his head down, and just never got an opportunity. My junior year in football, I sucked. It was not a good year. I was too small. I wasn't physical enough. My junior year in basketball, my basketball coach, because we made it far enough in the playoffs that I didn't have opportunity to try out for the team, so he hosted a special tryout. Had a decent tryout. He calls me in the office, says, "Hey kid, you're too small, you're too slow, you're too short. Put some weight on and come see me another day." So a little bit of a fire underneath me, and tried out for baseball. Made the varsity baseball team my junior year. First practice, the coach, we're doing infield practice, and base running drills or whatever. So I was an outfielder, so I was one of the runners. First up, and he says, he looks at me and goes, "If you beat this ball out, you're starting the first game." So he hits a nice little grounder to his son, who's the first baseman, right? No chance in hell that I can have to make that out. His son wasn't very good, though, and bobbled the ball, and I was very fast. And I laid out, beat the throw, all proud, hopped up. Coach is like, "I was just kidding, you're not doing that." And I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here. So, my junior year really beat me down because my freshman year and my sophomore year, I was very, very, very fortunate. I had a good career. I was legit. I was a good athlete. And then my senior year, we had a new football coach, or a new baseball coach that came in for the following year. My football coach told me, "You're our team leader. What are you going to do about it?" So in the off season, I put 40 pounds on. I got big. I got strong. And then I just took the mentality of, tell me I can't do something and I'll show you I can do it. And, our football team had a motto of iron will, and it took 3 years for me to figure it out that I love the role of the underdog. I love being told that I cannot do something. Please, someone tell me I can't do it. I will go out and show you that I can, and I'll be hell-bent on doing it. But that came from my parents. Individuals that were successful, but they're only successful because they were determined to be successful. They held myself and my sister accountable for everything we did, and I was just, it took me a while to figure that out. So how does that get me here today? I went to Western Michigan to go to aviation school, be a pilot. It was either that or go to Butler, where I had a football scholarship. But I knew that at the end of the day, a 5'10" kid was not going to go to the NFL. So that was one thing I was willing to say I probably can't do. I just couldn't compete with that. But so I went and got my private pilot's license, and then 9/11 happened. And I remember at that time we watched the weather to get the weather. There wasn't, you weren't looking on your cell phone or anything like that to get the weather. And I remember watching those events unfold and looking at all those brave men and women running to the chaos was something that kind of resonated with me. My grandfather was in World War II, but outside of that, we really had no service jobs that, of that higher calling, I guess you could say. So I saw that unfold, and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of a reckless in the air anyway. I don't think anyone's going to fly on the airline upside down with me. So I switched my major from a flight major to a business major and picked up a criminal justice minor with the thoughts that maybe I can get in the Air Marshal program because then I can blend, two of my loves now together. But at that time, after I graduated, they were looking for individuals because everyone wanted to do that job. Everyone was fired up about that. You had to have 2 years of prisoner transport experience or law enforcement experience, and obviously out of college I didn't have that. So I did the next best thing was test to get into law enforcement. And at that point in time, you're talking about 2003, everyone wanted to do it. And to be able to get a job that, everyone wanted, it was just difficult. And I started testing in January of 2003. November of 2003, I had yet to get a job. My now wife, who was girlfriend at the time, she had come to Illinois. She got a job. She was paying the bills. I was working at Peapod as a delivery driver, paying kind of bills, but not really doing what I needed to do. And was going to go back to college, continue to work, and go into education. At least I was like, okay, at least I can go and be a physical education teacher like my dad, and maybe coach. And when I applied to Roosevelt University, got all my classes squared away. The day before I had to turn in my first check for school, McHenry County gives me a call, brings me in for an interview, hires me that day. And this coming Saturday will be my 20th year with the Sheriff's Office. So thank you, guys. The reason why I tell that whole background story, though, is because we tend to get too caught up in what is being pushed out as a narrative. We tend to have the wrong narrative about what we're trying to get done. I told you two opposite stories. You probably wanted to cheer behind the champion kid that really didn't have anything, that made his way up to a CEO position, or for me, the executive of the agency. And we do also champion the families that are allowed to give their individuals a privileged life per se. But the reality is what are we doing to control the narratives? How are we setting that narrative that resonates with people, as opposed to setting narratives that either really fire up only part of the people and tick off the other part, or kind of are just in the middle that really don't fire anyone up? And I'm new at this. I'm a cop. That's what I know to do. And when I go out and talk, I'm very matter of fact. You do this, this is what happens. And that ends up upsetting a lot of people, but I don't waver. I'm not here to pander to people. My job and my role is to make sure that, I apologize, I'm not in King County, so I can't help you guys out, but, in McHenry County, that, we are the safest county in the state of Illinois. That's my job. And when we're not, thank you. So when we're not, I'm not successful. That's my focus. Everything else is someone else's responsibility, someone else's job that I have no problem helping with and assuring that, their values align to make sure that they don't impede on what I'm trying to do. But for me, I'm laser focused on that. So there's a lot going on. There is a lot going on, and this year is going to be a little chaotic, right? I feel like every year seems to be like we're just unraveling a little more and a little more. And that puts a lot of strain on individuals like in my role and other roles, state's attorney's roles, I know is another one where, at the end of the day, I have very, very strong conservative values, but I don't have the luxury only to catering to one side of the aisle. When my officers are going to the house, they don't knock on the door and say, "Sheriff's Office, what part are you on? Dems?" Right? We can't do that. But I also can't, I'm not in the business of alienating a group that, supports what I do. So it's an interesting balance on how I'm able to navigate through that. Step one was when I got in office, all the politics aren't in the office. You notice this uniform. It's not a uniform. It's, civilian dress clothes. And I've made it a clear point for individuals that supported me and didn't support me in my office. I don't care about your politics. You're here to do a job, and we hold everyone accountable, and we hold everyone equally accountable. That's one of the things that I have really tried to stress is the word of accountability, because we seem to be in a day and age where no one has accountability anymore, including, elected officials, all the way down to are low-level crime idiots that think they can get away with everything, and they get a slap on the wrist. So I think if we really focus on accountability, that's something that everyone can agree with. I don't care where you lie, in your political worlds or your values. The accountability is the accountability. I have two daughters, 12 and 14. They are cheerleaders. It's definitely karma for me that I have to have two daughters in cheerleading. But we just had a competition in Charlotte. So cheerleading life is like hockey life. We're all over the place. And one of my daughters, my younger daughter, was complaining about a couple of her teammates who didn't pull their own weight. And I said, those are just complaints. I said, what are you doing to make sure that they can be in a position where they can be better? She's like, well, I'm doing everything I can. I said, there's a lot of I's in that statement. I said, what's your team doing to make sure that people are held accountable? And she just looks at me like I'm the idiot because I'm dad. So, but my older daughter, she's laser focused. If they don't win, she's going to lose her mind. And she knows that if she gets all of her teammates thinking the same way and gets them all fired up, they're successful. Two different kids, same mom and dad, same values. So, it's not easy. Keeping people in line and keeping people focused on things is difficult. So the Safety Act, I think, was that top number one? It didn't make us safer, I'll tell you that. So, but here's the reality. We're stuck with it right now. And, the sheriff's office, at least our office, worked with the county administration, the chief judge, the state's attorney, the public defender, the circuit clerk, and then ultimately the county board on trying to get that process right. So, I think it's a difficult process to navigate. In 2019, actually 2020 now, when COVID came up, at that point in time, I was a deputy chief in charge of operations, and we were having some concerns like everyone else in our profession about bringing individuals into our facility because we didn't know what that meant. The health department was giving us an answer. The Illinois Department of Health was giving another answer. There was another answer that would come through National Department of Health. So we did not know how we were able to segregate our inmate staff or our inmate population. How were we going to protect our correction officer staff? It was a slew of issues. So at that point in time, law enforcement leaders got together in the county and decided to issue notice to appear citations for Category B offenses. That was a lot of words for you guys, I know. Notice to appear was basically a ticket that you would issue in lieu of arrest. So if an individual committed a Category B offense, let's say a criminal damage to mailbox, I think we all can agree that individual probably doesn't necessarily need to go to jail, but they need to be held accountable. So we issued a notice to appear citation. Here's your ticket, here's your court date, we'll see you at court. So that was in 2020. Now we're going to fast forward to right before the Pretrial Fairness Act portion of the Safety Act comes into play, because that's really what we're all going to talk about. And on September 18th of this year. So I'm going to talk about that little time frame was the notice to appears that were kind of going into effect. Once COVID stopped, we stopped doing it. But let's go back to 2020. 2020, the sheriff's office, who is responsible for maintaining all the warrants in the county, had 2,500 outstanding warrants throughout the county. At the end of our little experiments with the NTA stuff, and I call it an experiment, it really wasn't. It was the best practice at the time. Our warrants went up to 3,500. Now we all can see what that means, right? Because if I give someone a piece of paper and promise to show up to court, there's really no, in the words of, and Drew, you'll be able to say, because I believe the Supreme Court deemed this Pretrial Fairness Act constitutional, because in the Constitution it says that the individual arrested has to give an assurity, right? It doesn't talk about money. We just used money as the assurity of what that individual who was incarcerated would guarantee that they would come back to court. But we use bond because everyone has money. Money means something to us. It's tangible, and we're not going to lose it, so we're going to go back so we can, if we think we're, innocent, we'll get our money back throughout that process. Well, obviously that doesn't happen, right? You give someone a piece of paper, say pretty please show up to court, they don't show up to court. So we, like I said, that, we were at 3,500, or we're currently at 3,500. So pretrial fairness kicks in September 18th, and now it is the responsibility basically of kind of the state's attorney, kind of the judge, to follow a matrix to assure that the crime that an individual commits checks a certain set of criteria that a judge looks at and says, yep, you met all those criteria, you'll continue to be detained, and your next court date is, in a couple days. Or if you don't, here's your stipulations for bond. Have a nice day. We'll see you at your next court date. So those are the only two scenarios now that we can have. Or they don't even make it to that detainment hearing, and they are issued a summons to appear. That pretty please show up to court. Well, guess what happened? Everyone that was given that pretty please show up to court isn't showing up for court. Well, in its infinite wisdom, the Pretrial Fairness Act says you probably should issue them another pretty please, but you probably should add another pretty please on there just to make sure that they show up for court. So I'm going to give you a scenario. You have an individual that was given a summons on a criminal damage to mailbox to show up to court. That individual does not show up to court. The judge issues another summons to show up to court. 30 days later, that individual doesn't show up to court. Now the judge issues a failure to appear warrant. That individual now is detained on a non-detainable in court in front of a judge who's now upset that he didn't show up to court for 2 times. That's now going to probably hold him until his next court hearing. So there's two things to that. One, it kind of seems ridiculous, right? I mean, on paper, that just seems ridiculous. 2, that individual who, had he committed that, that criminal damage, that Class A misdemeanor, $1,000 bond would have been out on $100, is now currently incarcerated. And us taxpayers are paying for him to be incarcerated. Now he can't even get out. And I guess that's your accountability, but who's really paying for that? Because at the end of the day, he's going to serve his time when he's sitting in jail and then be kicked out with a slap on the wrist, and then that court case is over. Now multiply that by how many summons we have and how our court case is going to be flooded. So really, we've just kind of delayed the inevitable by 2 months on these pretty please. The other aspect of that is that a lot of these individuals that will be on release and are issued failure to appears, if the judge or the circuit clerk or the arresting officer isn't really paying attention, that could turn into a nationwide servable warrant on a failure to appear. Does anyone know who's responsible for picking up these individuals? The sheriff's office. So this year, or I shouldn't say this year, we're in 2024, man. 2023, the sheriff's office maintained a transport budget of, I want to say like $13,000 for transports for the year. In June, we were at $24,000. So guess who has to pay for all of those? The taxpayers. This seems like a really fair process to me, doesn't it? So the problem is when we talk about things like this, when the Illinois Sheriff's Association, the association where all us sheriffs get together and talk about awesome wear with their cowboy hats, cowboy boots on, we weren't really invited to the table to talk about what this really means because, it was a feel-good law. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel so good about it, But the problem is that law enforcement is so good at what they do, they adapt and overcome. We're not going to say, yep, guy got bonded out. I'm not going to do anything about it. No, we'll be upset about it. But if that individual commits another crime, we're going to run our butts over there, take care of it, and bring him back to jail. So it's going to be deemed successful because we're out busting our humps double time, not to mention that all the other stuff that we're responsible for doing as well. So, you can all tell that I really enjoy the Safety Act. Well, the new gun law, right? Was that the next one, next topic? And obviously we'll open up for a conversation about this. I'm more than happy to talk about all this. I'm kind of just giving you the 30,000-foot view on it. So the gun law. I was amongst the several other sheriffs that, right away wrote a letter saying that we're not going to uphold this, unconstitutional law, that it wasn't our job to do it, which got me right in the crosshairs of the governor, and he said he was going to fire me. I said, okay, good luck. But what also happened to that were a bunch of lawsuits that were created. One of the lawsuits, I'm listed as a defendant. Marengo Guns, in conjunction with other agencies, listed me and the state's attorney as defendants because we could enforce the law, which puts me in a really, really weird spot, right? I mean, I can understand in a vacuum, in an academic world, by position, they have to list me, right? So, and I got to be careful about how I talk about this because I'm still in a lawsuit. But the frustrating part about that is that we went back to the Illinois State Rifle Association and said, we're not going to object to anything that you put in this lawsuit, but can you take my name out of it as one that's responsible for your lawyer bills at the end of the day? And they're not willing to do that. And that puts me in a position where I'm like, so now taxpayers are going to have to pay for this lawsuit that I agree with, and you won't take me out of it. So if you know anyone, can you put a good word in for me? I'd really appreciate that. But this law is difficult, right? I think, I think we're all hopeful that the U.S. Supreme Court will look at this and, really interpret it the way that it should be interpreted, and so we can be done with it. The reality of it is that McHenry County Sheriff's Office, between calls for service and proactive activity, handled just over 40,000 calls last year. I am a staff on the operations side of 104 individuals. That's me all the way down to our newest hired deputy. That's a lot of calls for service. That's 112 calls of service a day. Now you think about that. My minimums on day shift and midnights are 6 cars. On afternoons, it's 7 cars. My county is 625 square miles, and it's broken up into 8 areas. Do you think I have any time to deal with that nonsense? I don't. So the reality of it is that's not happening in my agency. 1, because I don't have the time. 2, well, I just really don't want to. But 3, the reality is I had mentioned before, McHenry County is the 6th largest county population-wise in the state of Illinois. By far, of the top 6 counties, of even the top 10 counties, we are the safest, and it's not even close. So for me, it's state legislators, why don't you come up to McHenry County and ask us what we're doing and why we're doing it so well, and maybe we can mimic that throughout the state. Don't tell me what to do. So, obviously, we'll answer questions about that as well. Was there anything? Migrants, yikes. So, contrary to belief, because of the sheriff, he can do whatever he wants in the county. I mean, I guess I haven't tried it yet. It might be cool in term 2. But the reality is the Trust Act. How many of you guys know about the Trust Act? So the Trust Act was passed years back. That basically said that law enforcement is not able to get involved in anything immigration. Plain and simple. McHenry County used to house ICE, immigration. At its heyday, that was a great contract for the county because we were housing individuals that were waiting for their court hearings to go through. That meant anywhere from $11 to $12 million a year of a revenue for the sheriff's office and for the county. On at the time, about a $36 million budget, that's a pretty good offset. I mean, that's a good way, and that you can continue to provide a service to, our partnering agency with the federal government, and not putting any individuals at risk, providing individuals that are going through that court process a humane place to stay, not a tent outside, but and letting that individual go through the process. But we lost that. The state of Illinois said you can't have contracts like that anymore. We are a sanctuary state, and we don't believe in your unfair treatment of individuals. So guess where it got us? Right here today, right? We see the news. We see what's going on. Crystal Lake train station, Fox River Grove train station, and Woodstock train station all have had buses drop off migrants that have been put on the train and sent to what is called the landing zone of Chicago, where these individuals can. I don't even know what goes on over there, to be honest with you. But it puts law enforcement in a really, really interesting spot. So I know that we had a Illinois sheriff's call, and I had some reservations about that just because, one, I don't trust the Attorney General, of Illinois, right? Because at the end of the day, he can tell between him and our governor can basically do what they want to. And to tell one of our law enforcement officers to escort a bus to a landing zone gave me a little bit of concern, because all it takes is one immigration attorney to say, were those individuals free to leave, and were you participating in that? How many zeros do you want to add to that check, because you're violating the law and you're blatantly violating the law? And unfortunately, that makes me look like I'm not doing my job. But I got to be honest with you, my guys and gals on the road are more important to me than some nonsense bus. Now, what I talked about before, law enforcement is always smarter, right? We always adapt and overcome. So for our county, at least, the Emergency Management Agency is responsible for the coordination of all that process. Anytime law enforcement is involved or we get word that, a bus drop-off has occurred, we get right on the horn with the EMA director. The EMA director has a direct line to Chicago to coordinate that effort and get those individuals. Usually it's been 3 for 3 so far on a train to that landing zone. But I said at some point in time, that train thing isn't going to work and the bus thing is going to have to be plan B. And he looked at me and said, well, how are we safely going to get there? I said, you're a director, right, of a state-supported agency? He goes, yeah. I said, it sounds like you'll have to ask my agency for a security detail on a transport to an address and not tell me anything about it. And now I'm working on behalf of my EMA director to provide them with the security detail. Semantics, yes, but guess what? I'd love to see an attorney general come after me for helping out the Emergency Management Agency on a safety detail. So, again, one of those things where we just kind of find a workaround. My concern, what happens when Chicago says no vacancy, park's closed, and then puts them back on trains or buses back to where they came from? So I sat with one of our state senators and our county board chairman, because they were asking me, what are you going to do? I was like, the last time I checked, that's a legislative issue. Last time I checked, the sheriff's part of the executive branch. I'm not going to do anything. What are you guys going to do? And, I think it's an opportunity for, the Republican elected officials to put their heads together and come up with a solution, go across the aisle and say, we've come up with this solution. This is how we're going to address it. Are you guys going to sign on with it? And they're going to be put in a really, really awkward spot, right? That a Republican Party comes up with a solution to a problem, and they have to acknowledge the problem, they have to agree with the party, or they disagree with the party goes along and does it, shows it's successful, and then continues to go amongst its merry way. Unfortunately, I've yet to see that program. But for me, that's, I guess, when I'm in my normal clothes, when I can start holding others accountable, because I got to be honest, I understand the state is run by Dems right now. It is. But that doesn't mean the Republicans can't do anything about it. Get loud, get vocal, come up with a plan, make it happen, and let's just do this. So, it's frustrating me. Again, that's that thing where, we as law enforcement we're the remedy to a lot of problems. And I'm not about fixing the remedies, because we're always the one that are trying to make the change. Law enforcement should do this, they should do this, they should do this. Let's get to the root of the problem, and let's address the root of the problem. And then, once we can do that, we can do things a lot better. So I've yammered on way too long, haven't I? Where's the hook? Get the mic. Here's the scary part.
Questions? Okay.
I guess I was just going to go with what you last stated, and that is, in your opinion, what is the root of the problem?
Government. I mean, let's be honest. So we have an immigration oversight on a government agency, right? So you know it's already broken. And the way, there's two problems that we have. Individuals that are trying to get across legally are having a hell of a time. That's the truth, right? But we also have our highest ranking officials saying, hey guys, come on in. I mean, that's problem two, right? So if we can acknowledge at some point in time in a way that we aren't attacking people and saying, listen, you obviously recognize that this is not working. I don't care if it's your idea that you're going to come out and say, hey guys, I apologize, it's not working. Or, if you wanted to recreate what your new idea is, fix the damn problem. It's not open. The park's not open. But I also recognize if you do want to come here and you're seeking, whatever it is that you want to claim that you're seeking, here's the process to do it and actually clean that process up. So there's two ways that we need to address that. I don't have the answer on how to do that. I'm not at that level. I don't sit at the table because, the other part of it is that might be happening. I've sat at tables where leaders are involved. It's just as stupid and comical as the Simpsons show as everything else that goes on. Even my meetings, like we'll sit around for an hour and I'll get done. I'm like, I just wasted an hour of my life that I'll never get back. But in the moment, you feel like you're actually doing something. So I know how hard it is to make changes on a county and local level. I can only imagine what it looks like on a national level, and that's just reality. But I think at some point in time, people have to push their egos aside and say, listen, we really have to figure something out because this isn't working. We all saw how Seattle worked out when they created, that Chaz or Chop zone, right? What was that? Lord of the Flies within 15 minutes over there. Guys are shooting each other, and it's like, yeah, can we get law enforcement back? It's like, nope, park's closed. So,
yeah, I've got so many questions here. The gun law. They're talking about confiscating already. They're talking about the governor will have the right to change it. Now that he's got people bringing them in, saying, oh, we've got them, now we know who has them to take them. Have you heard this? Or
first of all, the governor has a lot of things come out of his mouth. I would, the reality is I would love the director of the Illinois State Police, Brendan Kelly, to come up here and say that, one, I have the manpower to be able to do that. He doesn't. I know he doesn't. They had to combine their areas with different troops just so they could cover and do what they need to do on a daily basis. So just like how my agency is overrun with stuff that we need to do, his agency is. Unless, he would have to tell the Illinois State Troopers that they're no longer able to do their normal daily duties and start knocking on doors on lists that they may or may not have. So, I think it would be very interesting to see how that works. I think your state troopers and your leaders in areas know who their sheriffs are and would be making phone calls and having offline conversations about what is really going to happen. And I will say that I have very good relationships with the captain and lieutenants in my area, and they knew where I stood, and they understand what McHenry County is about. There's a lot of other problems that are going to need to be addressed before they can even get to that. And not to mention, I actually just was talking with another local chief. He's like, hey, what's going on with this gun law? And I looked at him and said, I don't know. He goes, neither do I. So I got to be honest with you, local law enforcement has no clue what they're doing because they haven't even tried to push anything out. So as good as it felt for them to push that, it just is as chaotic as everything else that they've tried to push lately.
I'm still wondering because I hear the Kane County equivalent of the sheriff saying he's going to uphold it.
I think Ron said the same thing that I said. I'd be happy to give Ron a call and say that. How is he going to uphold it? Now, does he mean that if an individual commits a crime with a gun, is he going to be put in a position where he has to do something with it? That's a different story, right? If someone's driving down the street with an AR in their trunk, they get into a wreck that, and this is how it would happen too. They get in a wreck, trunk flies open, AR flies out, lands in a daycare parking lot, right? That's how that's going to end up. it's going to put law enforcement in that weird position where we're going to have to do something with that. So, are we going to grab it and put it in our evidence locker and kind of just, it is what it is? Maybe, but, I can tell you that the sheriffs are not knocking on doors. Ron Hain is down so many people that he isn't even going to be able to do that. So, the reality of it is you're going to tell law enforcement who's understaffed, overworked, to do something else that they don't want to do. We're here to get your guns. No? We're still here. No, that house is fine. They're shooting at each other? No. Just come to the door, right? It's not going to happen. It's just reality.
No, it was just pretty much a follow-up of the same thing, because my father was a gun collector and had a lot of military-grade equipment, which means that, in theory, with my FOID card, we'll say, someone I know, we'll say, has a rather large collection and has to register it like a sex offender. And with this, I'm glad to see that even if that person doesn't register, or even if they do, that the sheriffs aren't going to be coming after them.
What's your address? We're just.
This is my friend.
John Gripe, I'm a candidate for county board here, and you're giving me a lot of hope, because one of the things I struggle with is people in this county that I talk to that have no clue what's going on. So this is helpful for me. But it's also helpful to know that there's people in McHenry County, and I believe we could do this in Kane County to actually fix something. I hear so many of the county board members now going, there's nothing we can do. It is the way it is. And that's not the case. So helping to inform people, thank you for that. Thank you for what you do. Man, you have every reason in the world to move to Canada or something. But you're not doing that, and you're staying patriotic, you're staying committed, and it helps all of us who are trying to do the same thing. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So I will say, when I was running, because before I ran for sheriff, I think I ran for a student council because my girlfriend was on it, right? So I had never run for anything before. I wasn't into politics. Like I said, my grandfather was a hard Republican. My parents were hippies. They were kind of weird Democrats, but they were more JFK Democrats. I told them I was running. My mom gave me the mom look, like, is that something you really want to do? I'm like, I don't know. I was just told I should do this. But my race was ugly. Chris, you saw my race. It was, for those that don't know, it was a brutal race, and it was just a primary race. And my race cost me $300,000 for a primary race in McHenry County, right? Hillbilly McHenry County, $300,000, and my opponent raised $300,000 as well. And for me, at the end of the day, just doing the job of getting out and talking with people is a civil service. You're just educating people. Even if you don't win, it's, if you're sheriff before me was a mentor to me, and I would not be standing here unless he was, did what he did. And he said, Rob, at the end of the day, when you go home, if you can look at yourself in the mirror, then you've done the right thing. And honestly, because my election was weird, it was June was the primary, so we had that really, really long run-up. My opponent came out hard in September of 2021. So from September of 2021 to September of 2021 to June of 22, I was told there'd be no math here. So, we're talking about 8 months, 10 months. I went to 110 events. I walked every single street when I got the numbers of Aurora and knocked on every single door that voted R. I was not going to lose, but I also knew that I didn't have the means and the funds and everything that he was doing. And he owned a local business and restaurant, would give free meals away, invite people in. Hey, vote for me. Here's your meal. Have a good day. I didn't have that ability because, one, I still had to work, right? At that time when I was, when I was running, I was the chief of investigations, and then I moved to the undersheriff, which is the hardest working position in the sheriff's office. So I worked from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then I would have to hustle and get out and do my political stuff, which I hated. I just hated it because I couldn't focus on both. And I'm an individual that has to be able to focus on both. And I mean, I look back, and I still to this day look back, Apple Watch, right? It shows your resting heart rate and everything. I try to maintain physical fitness. That's like one of my releases. I couldn't do that anymore. My resting heart rate was, up like 20%. I'm sure I lost 10 years of my life doing that nonsense. And then the day after I got elected, it was like, shh, back to normal. So thank you for running, because it's not easy. But I will tell you that I don't know where your district is in the county, but Del Webb carried me. Those individuals have family members that live in the county, and I don't know how many times I got invited into their houses. And you're talking about in a time where, still people didn't understand what was going on with COVID and all that. And getting invited to houses, I got so many banana bread. I got a couple dates, not just from the old ladies, but from their daughters. They'd pull out the photo album and say, my granddaughter would be perfect for you. I'm like, ma'am, my wife is literally across the street doing the same thing I am. Can you at least wait till she gets out of earshot? But yeah, no, it's difficult. It's a hustle. But, like I said, you have to have a story, but your story has to be your story. And that was one of the things that won it for me is I knew my story. I knew what I did. I knew my history. My opponent didn't have a story, had to make one up, and was basically running a Joe Biden campaign, hide in the basement, don't do any debates, and just say I'm big bad idiot. I'm a woke kid who is entitled, who's afraid of his own shadow and hides behind a desk. And I was like, flagpole, 3 o'clock, bro. Let's do it. But, that never worked, so.
Hi, over here. So thank you for what you do. I know you said several times you're in a difficult position, and I can certainly appreciate that. Well, these past 2 years have really caused me to do a deep dive into the Constitution. And as I understand, the office of sheriff is the only office that's elected directly by the people. You aren't beholden to Governor Pritzker or any mayors. He can't fire you. You're answerable to we the people. So I have a couple questions. Did you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution? And will you defend the residents of McHenry County against overreach of government that are clearly violating their constitutional rights?
That was a conversation that came up a lot during my election, right? And I think a lot of it came from Sheriff Mack and constitutional sheriff and all that. So I'm going to give you my honest answer. I don't need to call myself a constitutional sheriff. Pardon my French, but that's bullshit. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. I took that 7 different times. A deputy, an investigator, a sergeant, a lieutenant, a deputy chief, a chief, an undersheriff, and a sheriff. I think I've proven that I'm upholding the Constitution. Unfortunately, in that piece of paperwork, it says the Constitution of the United States of Illinois, the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of Illinois. It puts me in conflict because I have to uphold both at some, doing the same, especially when they are in conflict. So what do I have to do as the sheriff of McHenry County to ensure that each and every individual is provided the rights that are guaranteed to them under both constitutions? Easy task, right? Super easy. It's not, but I don't think it's my job to enforce something when a crime is not committed. Okay? So if an executive order comes across, I'm not enforcing it. If a piece of legislation says that guns are illegal, but I have no means or no way to go into someone's house to get those illegal guns, guess what? It's illegal for me to violate the Fourth Amendment. So, due process. So, yes, I have taken that oath. I'm pretty passionate about, my job and what it is to do, what the individuals that elected me to do that job, take that, with the highest regard. And I know that I have 4 years to prove that, so that I can have another 4 years to prove it, so that I can have another 4 years to prove it. McHenry County is a very Republican county. I guarantee you, if I don't uphold that end of the bargain, I'm out. I'm on the street looking for a job. So that's not something that I take lightly. It's not something that I cater to. And I think that, you talk to a lot of sheriffs out there, their job is very difficult. Because I'm going to tell you what, that question that you proposed is not a question that I answer to the other half of the county as well. But my answer is the same. You elected me to uphold the laws. You elected me to keep this place safe. I'm going to do what I need to do both. And if they're in conflict, I'm going to be transparent about it and say, listen, here's this new law. Here's the problems it creates. You need to fix it. And then go that route. Boy, that made it really quiet in here, huh?
Here, wait, Chris.
So everyone in here, most if not everybody in here goes out knocking on doors to talk about politics and the voters. And I think it's important that when we do, we know what we're talking about. So what was it, about 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, when they passed that law about illegals being allowed to become cops? Can you explain that?
That is a really good question. It's going to be a super easy answer. So, you're correct. There is a law that was passed that allowed individuals who are not citizens of this country to become law enforcement officers. So, the McHenry County is, let's be honest, it's kind of a entitled county. We have high expectations of our law enforcement. Because we have those high expectations, we have really good law enforcement, we have high taxes. That's reality. But because of all of that, McHenry County Sheriff's Office has to hire officers that are able to uphold our values and our expectations. So we do background checks. I cannot do a full background check on someone who I have no idea who they are. Plain and simple. If I don't know who you are, and if I can't go and knock on doors of your neighbors and go through your history, guess what? You're not hired by me. I think that would be part of the background check, wouldn't it?
Did everyone hear what he said? That you have to be an American citizen to own a gun? That's right, Chris? Yes. Legally, correct. Sure.
Going back to your last spiel about the Constitution, U.S. Constitution in Illinois, wouldn't the U.S. Constitution kind of trump the state constitution?
Well, I think under conservative values, we all agree that the U.S. Constitution gives you a certain set of rights, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not really good at this, but I think I have a general understanding of it. And the states were afforded the ability to create their own set of rights, that catered to each state, which made the difference of all states, that led to a nationalist government entity to run everything. It was a lot easier when you had only a handful of states and you could easily get to another state. It's a little bit more difficult when you deal with 50 states and it's not so easy just to pack up your carriage and move, one state over and then just drop there. So, that's the million-dollar question. When does a state overreach on its laws and starts infringing on your federal laws, right? Well, I think we're seeing that process play out right now with the guns. I think that is part of the chaos. I think there's some unfortunate lack of understanding of how that works, not only on the citizen level, but on the individuals that are making these laws. Some say that may be part of the plan to create the chaos. People like to live in the chaos a little bit. I honestly think it's just incompetence. You've met some of your representatives. They're not the sharpest, tools in the drawer. But I think, you have to, unfortunately, you have to take each incident by itself and then look at it in scope of, all right, did you violate state constitution? No, but does state constitution violate federal constitution? Well, that's great, but if you really want to get to the answer, you have to run through the whole process of the state and then hope that the feds weigh in on it. mean, that's how the system was set up. But that then goes back to how important it is to elect individuals who are competent, that, aren't in there for partisan reasons, aren't in there for, where they're going to make a buck because their donors want them in a position and they'll keep feeding their pockets. I mean, this, to be honest with you, I mean, America is the greatest experiment in the world. In no other place can I be standing in front of you talking freely without a concern, other than maybe I hurt a couple feelings or people don't like me walking off the stage. Any other country, you don't like me, there may be an individual where I'll be just executed, before I even leave. So let's be honest, at the end of the day, we still are dealing with we're dealing with first world problems here. But it's still an experiment and we're constantly learning, right? I think that everything we do, it's a new chapter to how we get better. I think that it all goes back to when our children are going through school, how do they learn on what really the goal is to get better? My grandfather said, there's an easy path to success. You get an education, you get a job, you find a wife, you buy a house, you raise a family. And you provide, and if you can do those 5 things and make your children's life better than your life, then you're successful. Well, the problem is I think we got really, really good at that, and we made our children's life so easy that they're so messed up they don't remember what the process is, which is part our fault, right? Because we didn't teach them the process. So, how do we get back? And I'm going to probably pull this mic out. But, I mean, for, 50 years, the other side has been doing this every year. Well, we're all the way over here now, right? Hi. We're here, but we want to be back over here. Unfortunately, we're trying to do this right now. We can't do that, right? We have to go through that painstaking process of turning that huge ship in a canal around, which is hard in itself, and then getting it to go back this way. Well, guess what? That might not ever come to fruition during our lifetime. That's reality. But are we willing to put the time in, to put the effort in, the sacrifice, to get that thing turned around, to have level heads, and say, this is where we want to get back to. But we have to teach our children that, and we have to tell them when they have children, they have to teach them that. So, that's how we get, where we're at. It didn't answer your question, I know, at all, but it was a good answer for me to talk a lot.
Yes, I live in Kane County here, and I have an expired FOID card. Is it pretty quick to renew these? Imagine that. So I have an expired FOID card, but no guns. So what I heard in the last week, less than a week, is that the state is saying, if you have an expired FOID card, you must not have registered guns, and you should lose your driver's license. Is this false narrative?
So I haven't had a chance. Well, yeah, I heard the same thing. I haven't had a chance to actually look at that legislation that was pushed through the Sheriff's Association. So one of the things I didn't recognize, and I blame my predecessor for this, is that when you become sheriff, you become a lawyer. I don't know how many laws I read through. And again, I'm all in. So now the Illinois Sheriff's Association executive director, he calls me every single day and says, hey, did you read this law? I'm like, no, I had work to do. He's like, well, I'm sending it to you. I want to get your interpretation to it. It's like, well, thanks. I appreciate that. So that's usually when you want to know when I'm reading law, it's usually, so I go to the gym at 5:30. I get home at 6:30. From 6:30 to 7 is when I read law. So anyone wants to read law time with me, we can have law with Robb, 6:30 in the morning. But yeah, so I heard the same thing. But I didn't hear it was expired. I heard it was revoked. I heard if you had a revoked FOID, they were going to revoke your driver's license. So I apologize. I didn't lay the foundation. I told you all I'm a cop. I swear a lot, so I'm going to swear right here. The responses from the sheriff is, what the fuck does one thing have to do with the other? So I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to do. I don't, I mean, the reality of it is, I mean, can you imagine, and I think it was one further, and I think it was not only did you have a revoked FOID, but I think that was you had to turn in your revoked FOID by statute, so individuals could legitimately have their FOID revoked, right? There are legitimate reasons why you can have your FOID revoked. You have a domestic battery and you're charged with domestic battery, guess what? You lose your FOID. You probably shouldn't have the right to, if you have been deemed by a judge and through court, through due process, I don't think anyone in this room would say, yeah, you know what? That individual who just beat his wife, here's your gun back. Don't do anything stupid, though, please. Right? So, I mean, there's a certain process to that. And I think there's probably a process where you can get back to being an individual that can have that. But through that process, let's say your FOID is revoked. The state mails you a letter and says your FOID has been revoked for this reason. Please drop it off at your local law enforcement agency. That agency pulls a report, and then they ship it off. Okay, let's, because the legislator just lives in a vacuum, not reality, let's say that whole process works, but now we're relying on the U.S. mail to make sure that my driver's license isn't going to get revoked, because that one time, the one guy who actually does it right does that, and then it never makes it over to the Illinois State Police, who's totally squared away with the FOIDs, right? I mean, you have a guy to call, that they're going to be able to get it and process that so that your driver's license, there's so many things that can go wrong with that. So yeah, on paper, yes, it seems a little ridiculous. We'll just wait to see when the session comes through to see what it looks like.
Hi.
Hi.
I told myself I was not going to talk today, and it's not working. This is just like too much.
I don't know if that's good or bad for me right now.
I guess I want to make a statement or offer a talking point more so than ask a question, because to me what's happening here seems very obvious. I spend a lot of time on the back channels of Telegram and BitChute and Rumble and all these platforms that have come up in response to the censorship. And the illegals that are entering are wearing ankle monitors, ankle bracelets. It seems the price of entry is a woman or children. The women and children are being left at the border, and they're coming on through. And if my information is correct, they're getting $2,000 a month. Of course, we're paying for that. And the benefit to the Democratic Party is that as they drop the property values, scare away the voters, which creates a wonderful fire sale for the elites who can obtain all this prime real estate for peanuts, they also increase the voters, which allows them to get more Democrats in Congress. And then, of course, by taking away our guns, we can't defend ourselves. So that seems to be the objective, as far as I can see. Any feedback?
So I hear what you're saying, and I totally appreciate it. If, for me, the game is, it feels like it's rigged, right? It feels like it's a rigged system. And now I'm really going to offend a lot of you. I told you I was an athlete, right? The ump is not calling strikes when I'm pitching. That's not an ump problem. That's a me problem. I should get better, and I should find a way to throw strikes or get people out. Does that mean it's going to be easier? It is absolutely not going to be easier. But you know what? I am not in the business of complaining about what the other side is doing. I'm in the business of doing what we need to do to be successful. And I think that's going to upset a lot of people when I talk about that. I honestly don't give a shit what the Democrats are doing right now. I don't care. I really don't. Because I'm so focused on what we need to be doing. And if I'm vocal on what we're doing and I'm transparent on it, we're going to do it, right? I mean, it frustrates me. I'm sick and tired about what happened in the past. I don't really care anymore. I'm tired. I want to get here. And how are we going to get here? Here's my plan. My grandpa taught me, you have to know where you came from and where you're at to know where you want to go. Great. We know where we came from. It's not a mystery. Where are we at right now? Can you name your Republican representatives in your respective areas, your county board members, your House reps, your state reps? Can you tell me anything about them? Do you know anything about them? And if you don't, shame on you. Right? What are their values? What are they doing? What are your candidates doing? It's exhausting. I get it. It's exhausting for me because I get asked, will you sit down and talk to me? Yeah. Well, right now, and I'm happy to do it. I really am. I've committed to it. My wife right now, she's in D.C. She's traveling. My 2 daughters are at the house, hopefully not burning it down. But, it takes a toll, and there's got to be some kind of level playing field where, individuals that have the energy aren't always the ones that are asked to do stuff. But we also have to be not so crazy that when we hear something from someone and we don't agree with it, we just dismiss them, or we change their story a little bit, and then we play this game of telephone that, Robb Tadelman starts as an average guy, 7 people down the line, he's the devil, right? Because that's how things happen. And, that, again, it means that we have to have groups like this. We have to then talk to 2 people and write down notes. And if we don't have the answer, don't make up the answer, because then we create chaos. Say, I don't know the answer, but here's a number where you can, an individual that you call, or here's where someone can be. And I think that's, that's really how we get this thing back to where we need to go.
We have one last comment.
Hi, I just wanted to answer this woman's question about federal versus state. And I'm not an expert on the Constitution, but I listen to one. If you haven't heard of Chris Ann Hall, she is fabulous, and she has online learning. Anyway, when our country was formed, it was a constitutional republic, and as the states were the original 13, they all had to agree to also have a constitutional republican form of government, and any other subsequent state, and they could not pass any laws that violated the Bill of Rights. So definitely the federal government is the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and all 50 states. It's just not honored.
Thank you, Roxanne. So with that, we'd like to thank Robb for taking time out of his day for coming today, for not only for tonight, but for what he does every day. We all appreciate what he's doing to keep the county safe.